The Quebec government is proposing that both sex and gender are listed on birth certificates. This will divide members of the trans and non-binary community into two different categories, as the public will only be allowed to change their sex if they've had gender-affirming surgery. This bill was proposed last week by Justice Minister Simon Jolin Barrette. He believes this bill is progressive. He said, "This is a step forward to ensure people can express their gender on their civil documents." As a result, this will publicize those who've had these surgeries or not, which are intimate details. This will be identified during everyday tasks, from things like going to get your mail at the post office or going to buy cigarettes. Rowan Woodmass, a non-binary Montrealer and founder of Queerite, a queer feminist and anti-capitalist design agency, spoke to Local 514 about how they will be affected by Bill 2.
My initial response was horror and disgust, especially because Bill 2, initially we had a big win earlier this year, which for non-binary people specifically, which was going to essentially sort of legalize our gender or make it possible for us to indicate that our gender is X on our identity documents. And so what's happening with Bill 2 now is it's an edit, it's an amendment, it's sort of like a development of this bill, but they've turned it around. So instead of being a victory for us, it's actually going to expose us to future discrimination and make it actually worse for us than if I could never even change my gender in the first place on my identity documents.
And if you feel comfortable sharing, how do you think that this bill is going to affect you and other people within the transgender community within, your and their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, so what the bill is proposing is to, for trans people and trans people only, to list our gender, which would be whatever our true gender is. So in my case, it would be X, or X as represented by non-binary. And they're proposing that even though we are able to change our gender, that there should be a permanent marker on our ID that indicates our genitals as well, which they are classifying as F and M. But anyone who's aware of the realities of trans people know that our genitals say really nothing about who we actually are. So I think it's really scary to be, if this bill would pass, that I would be walking around in Quebec society and also in society in general. I mean, we use our ID in other countries as well, with sort of a stamp on my forehead for anyone who sees my identity documents saying what my genitals look like. As somebody who is not, I don't think yet there are any people who were assigned non-binary at birth, but maybe that'll be something in the future. Right now, if my gender marker says X, I will already be exposed to a certain extent as a trans person, just because gender X is not something that a lot of people are familiar with and something that people aren't assigned at birth. But the fact that I would still have a letter that indicates the shape of my genitals on my identity documents is absolutely ludicrous. And there's really no reason for it. Doctors have said that they don't need that on identity documents, and I do communicate that information to people that need to know. So whether it's my doctor, whether it's lovers, friends, whoever I want to disclose what my body looks like, I will do that to them. So what this bill would do is it would take away the choice for me, and it would out me every single time I present my identity document.
Would you say it's not only discriminatory, but also a complete invasion of privacy?
Absolutely, yes. It's definitely increasing government oversight. There are a few bills actually that were proposed in the last week or so by the CAC that increase government oversight into our lives in other ways as well. One of them is Bill 92, and Bill 92 would allow any government official to have access to medical and psychological records of any citizen without a warrant. So that's something that's sort of a side note in terms of, I know we're talking about Bill 2, but in combination with other laws like that, if they wanted to see my entire medical history, any Quebec official could go and do so. And so this increase in government oversight, I hate to say it, but it is a sign of fascism, actually. And we do need some government oversight in society, I think. But this kind of oversight that is an invasion of privacy, and it's an invasion of privacy because it's unnecessary. The only reason that someone would need to know the shape of my genitals in everyday life is in order to discriminate against me, perhaps in order to misgender me, which already happens multiple times a day for non-binary people, especially in Quebec, and and treat me differently than other people, than cis people.
Quebec Solidaire's Manon Massé said this bill will set us back 15 years. Massé vowed that the QS would fight the CAQ bill in the National Assembly. Massé also said that if this bill becomes a law, it would create a dangerous situation of trans people constantly being outed, making them vulnerable to discrimination. So how did this bill come about? In January, the Quebec Superior Court's judge ordered that the government bring changes to Bill 71. Bill 71 was adopted in 2015 by the provincial Liberal government, which allowed trans and non-binary people to designate their own gender identity on their birth certificate. This would allow them to be identified correctly on provincial IDs, anywhere from healthcare cards to driver's license. So will Bill 2 expose the trans community to more transphobia? Daphne Barrel, coordinator of the Quebec Trans Health Action, also known as Aztec, a trans advocacy group, spoke with Local 514 about how the group is mobilizing to fight the bill.
Essentially, we've been waiting for a while for the Quebec government to respond to a judgment that was passed down by the Quebec Superior Court. And the judgment said essentially that the Quebec government has to do something to make it possible for trans people to change their IDs so that their gender identity is recognized. And it sort of forced the Quebec government to respond. And so we've been waiting for a while to see what that response would be. I think I can't speak for everyone in the trans community, but I think many of us were quite shocked at how regressive this bill was. I don't know if most of us expected it to look anything like this, but we had been preparing for a while, not knowing exactly what would be in the bill that would eventually come out, and it was just a really unfortunate surprise.
And would you say that this bill highlights a history of transphobia in Quebec?
I don't know if it's a history of transphobia in Quebec specifically. It's certainly it harkens to a time in Quebec before 2015 when you had to have bottom surgery in order to change the sex designation on your ID. Since 2015, trans people in Quebec have been able to change their sex designation without undergoing any surgical procedures, which was an enormous victory. And it made Quebec into, the kind of place where, like in many ways, a place where it, I would say certain rights and protections for trans people, hard-won rights and protections had been established. I mean, we had many more fights on the horizon, but that was an important one. And this bill really does push us back 6 years in that struggle. So it definitely recalls that time in trans history in Quebec, for sure.
Would you say that Bill 2 encourages transphobia, and maybe do you fear that there will be more transphobia occurring in Quebec because of it?
Well, absolutely, because I mean, I'm certain that I mean, it's not about increasing or encouraging transphobia so much as it is allowing transphobia to become dangerous and harmful. You know, essentially, like every time you present your ID to somebody and the person who's checking your ID can tell that you're trans, you know, that's when often discrimination, harassment, and at times physical violence happens, right? It's in this moment where someone who didn't know that you were trans necessarily is seeing something that's saying, this person before me is trans. And that's really dangerous. That's an everyday danger for trans people. And that's why it's already so important for many trans people to change the sex designation on their ID. This is not about being like feeling affirmed by the government. This is not about, as you know, Simon Jolin Barrette, who wrote the law, he said it's about trans people being able to express themselves. It's not about being able to express ourselves. And I want to make that absolutely clear. This is about safety. It's like when someone, so when and it's not hypothetical, right? This happens all the time. And trans people now, essentially there will be two classes of trans people. And those who have gotten bottom surgery will be able to present their IDs and not be immediately outed as trans. People who, for whatever reason, cannot or do not wish to have that surgery do not have that right and protection. And so essentially, it really creates a system which coerces people into getting surgeries that they may not even want in order to protect themselves on an everyday basis from being outed. And I mean, it's really a situation where this like essential form of everyday protection of being able to go about your life and you know, not out yourself as trans to everybody you interact with is, you know, suddenly being denied to people on the basis of their genitalia, and their IDs will essentially show, you know, what the state has decided their genitalia are, you know, and that's a really, really dangerous situation, and it exposes trans people to violence every day.
Thank you. What are the steps moving forward? You know, what is Aztec doing to fight this, as well as maybe other organizations you all are working alongside?
Well, I mean, for Aztec, you know, like our number one priority is, you know, making sure our community understands what the ramifications of this law are if it's passed into law, and you know, about, you know, measures to try to protect themselves. But on the level of advocacy, you know, we and many other trans organizations in the city are, you know, when we're being vocal in the press, but we're also, you know, pushing allies to be as vocal as possible, because this is a situation where really only outrage has the potential to stop this from being signed into law. You know, the CAC has a majority in Parliament, and so ultimately, you know, even though we have support from opposition parties in Parliament for opposing this bill, it's not going to be enough unless we, you know, convince the people who wrote the bill that they should reconsider, and that they must immediately consult the communities which this bill is going to affect, you know. And I read today that the Minister Joanne Barrette, is open to the possibility of meeting with representatives of the trans communities of Quebec, and that's good news. I really hope that he follows through on that, you know. But right now the best we can do in the trans community is just be as loud as possible about how this is going to affect us and the danger that it exposes us to.
Other community members are mobilizing in different ways, including writing to their members of National Assembly, and petitions have also been circulating online. Jolene Barret said the government is open to amending the law, following consultations with different groups, stating that there will be hearings on Bill 2. Artists within Quebec's trans community have written an open letter in L, addressing Bill 2. Local 514 spoke with two of the authors, Chris Bergeron and Alice Bedard.
The letter was written in response to Bill 2, which was it's a proposition for a law that contains some really problematic articles. So most evidently is Article 23, which would require trans people to have surgery in order to change their official gender mentions on their papers, which is something that was eliminated a couple of years ago. And this would roll them back like 15, 20 years. So I started this letter because I had this intense moment of frustration and sadness, and I just wanted to let my emotions known, and it kind of grew into this collaborative effort to just not only let people know that this isn't okay, but also to basically tell the government that, like, we are people, and we have emotions. We are just regular people and we want our fundamental rights to, body integrity and to dignity to be upheld.
So above also and beyond Article 23, which Alice just explained, there are a number of other contentious issues in the law. One of them is connected to markers, to how we are going to be identified. And there's this notion of a double standard. For some people, the law makes a suggestion of having gender identity as a marker, and for others, sex. Now, the people that will have sex as a marker are either cis people, men and women, or people who have undergone surgery. And the people who will have the gender marker will probably be people who haven't had the surgery. And so those are not necessarily cumulative. We may not have papers that have both markers side to side, as we thought would be the case. And so the minister kind of clarified that earlier this week. However, the notion of that double standard, that some people will have on their birth certificate gender and others will have sex, means that people will be identifiable as being trans. Now, for many people in this community, this question is an important issue, because if you can be identified, then you can be discriminated against. And that's where the risk lies mostly, because we can't predict how discrimination will happen. What we know is that birth certificates are not meant to categorize people. They're meant to give basic information, and they're meant to serve as a basis for your legal identity. So the notion of sex and gender in that notion, or being able to, the state having the possibility of highlighting who is trans and who is not, and knowing that is problematic for us.
Building on this and in particular to discrimination, does kind of having these two separate categories invalidate one's identity?
To a degree, it does. Now, it's a tricky question because the notion of gender is interesting. The notion of gender as a replacement to the notion of sex, because it's a broader notion. So I don't think anybody who co-wrote this letter or our allies believe that it's a step backward to talk about gender. That's not the issue. The issue really is the double standard. So it doesn't necessarily negate our identities. What it does, I think, is it categorizes it, and perhaps it gives a sense of hierarchy. Some people would be more trans than others. Those that have the operation are allowed to have the sex marker, whereas the others are just, what, pretending?
Yeah, it's an actual issue, just emotionally speaking, for trans people to kind of have to deal with this. There is so much, when you do a transition of this feeling of am I trans enough to be considered like okay doing this? Am I trans enough if I don't do hormones because I don't want to do them? Am I trans enough to be considered one to be accepted in this community if I don't change my pronouns just yet, and that sort of stuff? Because it's a very long and difficult process just within one person to kind of explore who you are and to question everything you've ever known about yourself. So to have like government pressure to do so just feels incredibly wrong as a concept, and not only and all of that is like on top of everything we've previously mentioned. Just like having this tier system, it's gonna be incredibly detrimental to everyone's mental health.
Another important issue or fact to highlight is that this is in fact a step backwards. Now, there wasn't any particular issue that needed to be fixed at that level. The issue had been fixed. Whereas, people today who want to change their gender markers can do so through a fairly streamlined process. And what happens is that the sex marker changes. And so we become, for the administration, in a sense, stealth. You can't know by looking at our paper who is trans and who is not. And that's what the community has been asking for years. And we got that in 2015. And now we're stepping back. And now we're adding this sort of administrative pressure on people for no reason. So the minister says that he is answering the more judgment from last year that highlighted the fact that gender is a better concept, a broader concept, and that perhaps instead of using sex, we should use gender on our markers. So he's using that as an excuse for making the change. He's saying that it's his answer to that. What he's doing, he's just adding, 2 parameters where there used to be 1, which is not in the spirit of what the more judgment was saying.
Thank you both. Does it make either of you concerned that maybe this is the beginning of I guess more transphobic laws imposed by whether provincial governments or anyone else, but maybe more specifically the CAT government?
I would say that it's not that I'm scared that like this is just the first of an attack against the community, because I don't believe this is a voluntary attack. I believe I choose to believe that this is just based on prejudice and false ideas, and just they were trying to do a good thing without knowing the issues, without knowing the consequences of them. And so of course, it has an effect on the confidence I have with the government into like protecting my fundamental rights and protecting the rights of my big trans family, which I love and cherish. So, of course, but I don't believe it opens the door to like, it's just the beginning of this attack. I believe it's a mistake. It's an important one, and it's one that we have to course correct immediately, and we have to learn from immediately. We have to just because on our side, we have been like super open to dialogue and super open to, our whole message has been contact the LGBT rights people and people who know better. That I'm just a citizen, you know. I'm just a regular person that just felt compelled to speak, but speak to people who know exactly how to fix this and how to make it better, and how to talk to those people and learn from this to do better. That's what I'll have to say.
I think this highlights perhaps a flaw in their process, perhaps. It's perhaps, I imagine on this issue, they're probably rushed their decision a little bit and didn't do their due diligence, right? If you're going to talk on behalf of the community, you have to do the work. You actually have to go and talk to the community, and you have to have consultations, and you have to understand the issues, especially at those issues, while they can be hard to understand for a lot of people, they are very well documented, right? There have been judgments, there have been studies, there's a lot of literature on these issues. And so if they were having a hard time navigating them, they should have asked people to help them, point them in the direction, right? So that's why we hope that it's just forgetfulness. We hope that it's just they were focusing on other issues within the bill, which is basically a bill that focuses on families and a large number of issues. And this seemed to be just one small issue in a very large bill. We don't know why they decided to connect this issue to the broader issues related to family. I think they probably went a little too fast. Yeah.
And I want to mention that the bill number 2 is, on its own, like it's a massive law. It's like 116 pages. I don't want to discredit all of it right away, because there are a lot of good things within that law, like the thing with mère porteuse. I forgot the term in English.
Surrogate mothers. That's surrogacies?
Surrogate mother, yes. So the bill does a lot of good things with surrogate mothers and regulating them, and there's a lot of reworking outdated terms and all sorts of good things. But that's why it feels so weird and so out of place. But if it's just a mistake, if it's just, something that they went too fast and they didn't know the issues and they didn't know what they were doing, I think now is just the time to put the ego aside and realize your mistake, fix it, and move on.
One thing that we can be very critical about is that they made these crucial decisions without going through the effort of explaining or socializing them to the public. And, they do that for most major issues. The government tends to try to explain as much as possible what their point of view is. Whether you disagree with those point of views or not is something else, but they do explain what they're trying to do. In this case, they haven't. In this case, they just put out the law, and people in the community had to fish out the elements that were problematic. And so people like us, you know, I'm an advertising creative and a novelist, and you know, you're a creative as well, Alice. We're not lawyers, you know, none of us know this stuff very well. And yet, because we're part of a marginalized community, we have to spend our time, our weekends, you know, bent over this law, trying to figure out what it says, what it means for our day-to-day lives, what it means for our legal status. I wish the government would see that sometimes people who are part of small communities also deserve to be talked to and you know, engaged with.
We're exhausted. And I want to say this just because it's not just from this week, because this week has been intense. You know, the four of us writing this letter have been working pretty tirelessly through every single day, trying to get the message out there, to get it known and make some noise, because we're terrified. But also, I believe there is this general feeling of exhaustion from everything, from feeling this fear that, you know, at any moment it could be taken away from us. At any moment, you know, just from people that don't know any better, people that don't care about knowing any better, and that we have, as again, private citizen. I'm just I'm an artist, I'm a filmmaker, you know, I do silly little movies and write little scripts and stuff, and I have to go and to the front and tell the government, don't kill people I love, again and again and again. I'm exhausted, and I believe this is a feeling that is shared within the community.
We're very talkative. I just want to clarify one point.
We have a lot to say as well.
Yeah, obviously, when Ellie says don't kill people, I think what she implies, and I don't want to, you know, speak on your behalf, but in you know, we're not saying that the government are murderers. What we're saying is this is a community. Our community is under a lot of psychological pressure, you know, from their day-to-day life, because it's still not as easy as it should be to be trans. There's still a lot of you know, stigma out there, and so because of that, we have you know, we are plagued by a very high suicide rate. You know, the numbers are pretty dreadful when it comes to our communities, and so these signals that blur the lines, that make it seem like the state is not here to back us, that make it seem that you know, things are going to get more complicated in the future, can have a very negative impact on people that are on the brink. And so, you know, this is a fragile community. We're strong in certain ways, fragile in others. And so, you know, I think the government has to pay attention to that fragility as well and acknowledge it in the way it communicates with minority groups in general. You know, we are not the first minority group that has complained about the way this government speaks to underprivileged groups.
You know, there are petitions going around. I'm sure in the coming weeks we'll see things like protests. You know, Jolene Barrette has promised consultations. We'll see what comes of that. But for people who do want to mobilize, get involved, and fight against this amendment in Bill 2, is there anything else either of you would recommend, like, to put out there?
Yeah, there's a number of tools. First of all, on the website of the Assemblée Nationale, there is a link to the bill, and you can consult the bill and then you can comment it. That's a very powerful way, because, you know, it actually, more than just giving your name, it's bringing an argument forward. So that, you know, that takes time. Then there are organizations that have built various petitions. Coalition, was it le Conseil québécois LGBT is, you know, one that
there's a couple ones going around. Yes.
Yeah. But the most direct way is probably to go directly to the Assemblée nationale, talk to your député as well. Our politicians are here to help us. So and write to the Assemblée nationale.
And I would say the easiest thing that people can do and should do is to talk about it and to keep talking about it, to keep this in the conversation until it is successfully resolved in a way that makes us feel safe. Just because this is one of my biggest fears, is just that, and it's the reason why I've been so vocal and why I've been so, pestering everyone with this for the past week, is just that I'm terrified that people will just forget about it, and just it's gonna be, just a bit something that is bad. We talk about it once and then we forget, and then it just passes and we don't. So if we keep making noise, if we keep talking about it, if we keep denouncing it as something that shouldn't be, yes, that will help, definitely. So that's I would say the easiest way to help is just to keep it in the conversation.
One thing that gives us a lot of hope is that we found this week a lot of positive feedback in terms of this issue. Our side of it, from civil society, so from media outlets, from other people in the outside of our communities, a great wave of support, and I think people are trying to have a bit of an understanding of what we're going through, which is wonderful, and it points to the fact that perhaps society is a little bit ahead of the government on this issue, which I guess is a good thing, because we can all collectively push them towards the proper decision.
With Montreal's municipal elections coming up, what do some of the candidates have to say? Well, some have faced this with skepticism. Former mayor and mayoral candidate Denis Coderre has pledged to fight this law.
I know that there's a project right now, the Bill 2, and there are some issues with the transphobia. There's some reality that some people question. We will make sure, when we'll be in office, to through our judicial people, our lawyers, to work specifically also on those issues. I think that what we are proposing today is that nobody will be left out. We put forward some policies. I've done that in the last mandate. I remember that at the village there was some specific issues. We need to provide not only the resource, but it's the way that we show some sensitivity. Same thing for universal access. And when we're talking about in our role, it's not just to put up some regulation, but it's at the same time that in a way that also when you build some housing, in the way that you build infrastructure, to make sure that we have that kind of reflex.
I've been speaking with Mr. Coderre and all the team.
A 2020 report from TransPulse Canada reports that the trans and non-binary Canadians face heightened levels of harassment, physical violence, and sexual assault. According to data released by the Quebec government in 2017, more than 40% of the province's population that was surveyed has witnessed transphobic or homophobic discrimination. So what does the Montreal community think about Bill 2? Local 514 spoke to Montrealers about their thoughts on Bill 2. Here's what Montreal had to say.
Why is the government getting involved in what anybody identifies as or what they have in their pants? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it's just oppressing people for the sake of oppressing them, which is what Canada fucking does. So it doesn't surprise me, but it's disgusting. Like, my sister's partner is transgender, and so she's like fucking living by all of this. But I mean, it's Canada. It's just what you expect, honestly, which is sad, but yeah, it's awful. So hopefully it's gonna go. Why the government feels they have any right to know what the fuck I identify as or what I have in my pants. It doesn't matter in any way. Like, there's literally zero reason for it. So It's just gross. It's just gross. It's sad. It's fucking sad, honestly. And it just, if that's a testament to what day and age that we live in, like, this is it. This isn't 100 years ago. This is 2021. And this is the shit that we're talking about in government, not all the other mountains of issues that are actually important. This is what we're gonna have a bill about. So, I just think Canada fucking sucks, so honestly.
Concerning the subject, I haven't really heard about it. I've seen some mention of it today, but I do feel like it's a very unfair thing to have to subject those who are transgender to such policy, but also forcing them to surgically remove parts of their body just to fit into that identity, even though that's what they identify as. I don't know how it's gonna go. I don't know if the backlash that they're getting right now, of course it's a lot, but are they gonna go through with the bill? Are they not? We don't know. I hope it doesn't happen, because I do feel like that is just a very unfair thing, and it's wrong. It's wrong to subject anyone to such a thing. I wish the best for those who are transgender, and I myself will continue to educate myself on the subject, because I'm still a novice to the whole thing, but I hope that any support can help, but also bring the betterment for the community.
I'm against the passing of the bill, because some people, because of health issues or other reasons, they cannot afford to get the surgery. So I don't think it shouldn't be validated, like their sexuality, just because of that. I mean, that's the reason why I think it shouldn't, like, that bill shouldn't pass. It's constricting. Like, they want us to be like either female or male by doing the surgery. For non-binary people, it is constricting.
I think I agree, because it's like a form of security. Like, if someone, like,
A little louder.
yeah, like, it's a form of like security. Like, how would they know? So I don't know how to explain. It's like, yes, they can identify as a woman, but it's like, it's a form where police officers at airports can determine, like, if they want to catch a criminal, they have to know if the person is a woman or a man.
In my opinion, like, it's not fair to the people that have not done surgery, like, to be, like, not to have this specific pronoun, like, it's just a pronoun, so, like, they shouldn't be not allowing them to identify as whatever gender they want to be identified as just because of, like, a surgery, because not everyone is also, like, eligible for surgery. Like, some people cannot even undergo that surgery, or like, it's too painful, it's too pricey, so, like, they won't be able to do it, and I just think it's, like, not fair for them. So no, I don't like that law.
And also, I don't think it's fair for the non-binary people. Like, if they don't identify any gender, I don't think it's fair. And I don't know why now it's required. Before it was not required. Now, why is this now?
Okay, well, I feel like people should be able to identify themselves with, well, whatever they want. I don't feel like there should be, like, requirements or anything that says that you have, in order to identify yourself as this or that, you need to do this specifically. I feel like they should just have the choice to be who they want, regardless of, like, anything getting in the way. So, yeah.
And I think that it's just like their story. We don't have to say anything. It's their body, their choices. That goes for everything. Yeah.
Montreal generally promotes the image of being LGBTQ2 plus friendly. However, this bill will change that image. Rowan voiced their thoughts on this.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, I mean, I know that this is a provincial law, but Montreal in particular, I think that the city does pride itself on being so welcoming to the LGBTQ community, in terms of the village and the parades and support that we have. But do you think a law like this really kind of, I guess, not only tarnishes that image, but no longer makes it a welcoming and safe space for people of the LGBTQ plus community? Pardon me.
That's a really good question, and sort of it's a pointed question, but I do feel that way. Certain members of the queer and trans community are more safe than others. Of course, white people are generally more safe than people of color. Cis people are generally more safe than trans people. And so certainly just speaking from a point of view of, from the trans kind of point of view and the non-binary point of view, I think cities, and I think any government likes to have, an image of being welcoming. And even the CAC's response to our activism thus far in response to Bill 2 has been, we are not setting back rights. And that's just not true. You can't just say that you are inclusive of trans communities. You have to actually listen to us and actually have to do things that materially we will find supportive in our lives. I personally have experienced in the healthcare system, doctors and therapists and other health professionals that have refused to work with me because I am non-binary. It's illegal to do that, but it is a reality that I have faced. And in addition, as an Anglophone, the French language is sort of a little bit less far ahead than English is in terms of how they are able to affirm people with genders like mine. So in French, I use the pronoun il and I spell it I-L-L-E. But I'm not read as a man, so verbally, no one ever uses the il pronoun for me in French. Certainly they don't use the pronoun yel, which is another example of a sort of a gender neutral pronoun in French, without being prompted to, and even then they tend not to use it. And I frankly get called madame every single time I interact with the government. And the government specifically, I think the most inclusive institutions in Montreal, at least in my experience, are actually the private institutions. They're the banks, they're larger corporations that have sort of like a consumer incentive to be more inclusive. Whereas the government institutions don't have that kind of incentive. We have to interact with them no matter how they treat us on a certain level. And they do not treat us well. They do not treat people like me well.
This is probably a more complicated question, so don't feel like you need to have the answers. But in terms of this being a systemic issue and just kind of outside of Bill 2 itself, I mean, what do you think would be a way that transphobia can be reduced from these systems? Maybe, I know training systems are kind of a small thing, but on that kind of level, what would you like to see?
Wow. When I found out about the I'll speak from my personal experience, because I think there are a lot of things that government institutions could do to be more inclusive of trans people, whether that's a male or female or other gendered trans person. But for me specifically as a non-binary person, I think the first step was to have the X gender seen as a valid gender marker and one that can be official in Quebec. I was so excited to have that, because currently, materially, my ID has an F on it. And that means that when I'm in touch with any government institutions, they will call me Madame, L, pronouns, etc. And so that was a very good first step. Full stop. Let's just do that. Don't add anything about the shape of our genitals to our identification documents. Secondly, I think that this will take time, but as you mentioned, the training piece, So I'm pretty loud about asking for what I need when it comes to institutions. And a lot of institutions haven't even considered that there might be another honorific other than monsieur or madame. Things like that they're just forms, they're just web forms, or they're just, templates for people to use when they're calling you. But they're made by human beings who either don't know about the existence of non-binary people or don't care about the existence of non-binary people. And I'd like to think it's the former. And so this education piece should be the government's top priority. What happens is people like me, and including myself, have avoided seeking mental health care until we absolutely cannot avoid it anymore. We've gone into debt or had to, we've had bank fees, for example, or fees from the government in terms of taxes that we haven't dealt with because we're so scared and turned off and averse to contacting institutions in Quebec. And that has real impact on our financial lives and on our health. And trans people, who aren't able to get ahead financially, trans people who aren't able to get healthcare do sometimes commit suicide. And I myself have considered suicide as well. And a big part of that is because of how far behind Quebec is when it comes to the treatment of non-binary people in particular. So we need education. We need a massive education campaign, starting with non-binary people exist.
Thanks for tuning in. To keep up to date with the newest episodes, follow Local 514 on YouTube and follow CUTV Montreal on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.